Kenneth, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for accepting our invite to be part of the podcast.
It was my pleasure.
Maybe to introduce to some of the people who are listening and to some of the people who are viewing us. Kenneth is a lawyer and he's a tech enthusiast. He's also deep into some philosophical, he has a deep philosophical perspective. And we are going to be having a general conversation. We'll focus a little bit on some of the legal stuff and the tech stuff. And that's mostly because I'm personally from the tech sector.
Oh, good.
And then we can, maybe talk a bit more about the kind of consequences those have both philosophically and otherwise.
Good.
I'll start you off by asking one of the intriguing points and one of the things that is facing us right now, the question of the new law that UCC passed, where they're going to attempt to sort of regulate people like me.
Bloggers and...
Yeah, exactly. So this is tricky for me, and I'm obviously I would prefer not to be regulated, but I still see that in terms of infrastructure-wise and in terms of implementation, this is tricky because the actual broadcaster, in my case, is Apple Music or YouTube or Spotify, where we put our podcast, right? And me, I'm just a presenter.
Yes.
I create the content, I distribute on their platforms, right? And even if I monetize, say, on YouTube manages the monetization. They just pay me according to how they feel I should earn, depending on how much views or whatever the algorithm says.
Okay.
In your perspective, where do you see, first of all, what is your opinion on this regulation? And secondly,
okay,
is this implementable?
So perhaps I'll start by breaking it down first. First, understand from the platforms that you used.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it from the concept of the platforms, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Facebook, Twitter, those are what you would call third-party applications. Okay. Or in most instances, most of them now have also become marketplaces.
Yeah.
Or they're in law called intermediaries. Mm-hmm. So most of our laws exclude or exempt from liability any intermediary because they believe they're only conduits. Their role is just to for you to be able to put your content on there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to your particular account, the one that you use to publish information, you're actually the publisher.
Okay.
Because you have authority over your account, although it is hosted in a particular environment.
Yeah.
But you're the one who has control over what you post, over what can be deleted. In some instances, actually, some apps have such controls that they cannot perhaps even delete what you have posted.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I don't think that's the case with Facebook and Twitter and most of these social media platforms because they can take down any offensive content.
Yeah.
But in most instances, that is the line, if the content is offensive. But if it's not, you can have it at will, you can post it.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one. In the sense, just to provide clarity to know that you actually own the content that you post on your
I'll follow up with
platform.
that.
Now, secondly, when it comes to whether UCC can actually be able to regulate such content, in my view, no. I don't think it is feasible to be able to say that you regulate every blogger, actually everyone who posts.
Yeah.
Because even me, if I'm posting and informing my friends on my various social media platforms, then essentially I am supposed to be getting a license from UCC.
Yeah.
But I don't think, in all honesty, that was the intent, in the sense that I believe, of course, they were trying to curb this vice that we call fake news that has infiltrated or permeated our lives and our online world in particular. And so although it comes from a good place, I believe also how it has been brought out is not feasible.
Yeah.
And I think it does more harm than good, especially since UCC in particular has not had a really good record with the public. They have new management now, which I think, the engineer Irene and her team, Abudu and the rest, are people that I believe have their heads screwed on their shoulders properly. But I think, in terms of the organization as a whole, especially from where it started from, and with its overreach in particular. I read an article by this guy, Mark Kalinachi, which was talking about UCC's overreach. And those were my thoughts exactly, in the sense that many people fear the regulator because of what they can do. And the regulator has also put that stance that, this is what we can do.
Yeah, exactly.
But so I think their heart is in the right place in terms of trying to further free speech, but also trying to ensure that you have responsible communication. But the way perhaps that they are going about it is difficult. And I honestly don't think it will be very easy to implement.
I agree, because I think one of the workarounds we've discussed for this podcast, for example, is having our friends, say in maybe Kenya or the US, own the account, right? And then would make the same claim any presenter on NTV would make, right? That we are just presenters. We are hired maybe for no money, but we are hired to make this content. And I don't see how like UCC is going to. I mean, I'm just curious to see the first maybe case in court about this specific issue, to see how that unfolds.
And I'm sure there are going to be many, but perhaps just to again give more clarity, when it comes to TV stations, radio stations, those are broadcasters.
Okay.
Now, those ones clearly, of course, apply for licenses from UCC.
Yeah.
But outside that, whatever content they publish is the station that has published it. Even if they are to put a disclaimer by saying perhaps that whatever presenter we have, but ultimately, if you host a presenter, if you host me on your show, and I say nonsense or spew nonsense, you're still
the consequences.
Liable. So although I will be liable personally, since I'm the one that has said whatever has been said, but you can still try to push yourself away from whatever I'll say. But ultimately, I'm still utilizing your platform. Now that is different, as I've said, from an intermediary. So you are a content provider, not an intermediary. There is a difference between the two. In the sense that Facebook does not create or collect, it just collects the content and makes it easy for people to be able to get it. But NTV, or all these other TV and radio stations do not just do that. For them, they actually prepare the content, and you know exactly what is going to air. You may not know what exactly will be said or how dangerous it is going to be, but at least you'll have a skeleton or an environment where you're able to discuss.
No, I think that makes sense though. My point was, I'm a content creator, for example,
Okay.
And UCC is looking for the account owners, right? This law is, again, because of the jurisdiction, this law is targeting Ugandans, right? So if instead of being the account owner, I have someone else, a friend, say a non-Ugandan, own the account. I am recording the content, and let's say I'm selling it to him.
So now, in that sense, you see, it would be your account. So you'd be the one that would be liable.
How come? I don't own the account. He owns the account.
In what sense? You're saying if you create an account?
No. So say I have a friend in Kenya, right? He opens an account on Facebook, right? And he publishes my content.
Oh, your content.
Yes.
Okay.
But because, again, UCC cannot stop Facebook from broadcasting in Uganda. I mean, it can,
of
but
course,
it's a bit tricky, right? So my content, I'm Ugandan, is being hosted on a Kenyan's account. Am I still liable?
It depends on what content it is. And it depends on what liability you're looking at. If you're looking at the law that we're looking at, no.
Oh, okay.
Because then the publisher will be another person from another jurisdiction.
I see.
So perhaps there the only overreach or the only sanction I can see is, as you mentioned, if UCC perhaps asks Facebook, or even asks perhaps MTN or Airtel or any of these internet service providers, iWay, Ecotel, Smile, and the rest. And perhaps those ones then block the account using the IP address. But in the absence of that, no. But you would be liable under other laws. For example, if your content is seditious, or if your content is harmful, if you're publicizing hate speech or anything that's contrary really to the law, then you would be liable from that sense, but not from the law that we're talking about.
All right. So that's cool. So let's talk about this whole regulation thing and control. And on the global scale, there are three perspectives that sort of catch my eye, right? There's what Twitter is doing. So Twitter is hiring people to do actual censorship, and they're going as far. They have a bunch of rules they published. So they're going as far as, if they can't censor you, if your content says of public interest, even if it falls in one of the other categories, say hate speech, they would label the content, right? So, for example, Donald Trump, the American president, some of his content would break some of Twitter's regulations, right? But the claim Twitter makes is because Trump is the president, people need to know that the president is actually saying stuff like this, right? So what Twitter came up with was to put some sort of blue label that, I think Trump once tweeted about people rigging the ballot by mail. Yeah, so Twitter would put some sort of disclaimer that this may be fake news. This is how you can know the safety of ballot by mail and sort of things that are equivalent. So that's one perspective, one approach Twitter is taking, right? The other approach, say for Reddit, I don't know if you use Reddit. Reddit is, I create a community. I let people come into my community, but I manage it, right? So I'm using Reddit, but me, the community owner, I manage the entire community, right? Yeah. And then the third approach is Facebook. So Facebook is hands off, right? They believe that in the end, the truth wins, right? So you say whatever you want to say. I think maybe they've refused the advertisement on politics. I'm not sure. Maybe that's Twitter again, right? But Facebook doesn't want to restrict how you speak, right? It says it's your speech, it's your free speech. We'll create our bots to trace what is clearly fake news, but we are not going to ask people to speak a certain way, right? Yeah, so from that perspective, which of those approaches for you do you see is more feasible? It sort of is more sustainable?
I wouldn't pick anyone over the other. I would say perhaps, a mixture or blend of all of those. Because as I mentioned before, I think fake news and unresponsible communication has become, a daily norm, has become a thing.
Yeah.
Not only for Ugandans, but everyone all over the world. As you mentioned, if the US president can tweet without any facts, that is really telling as to how far our society has degenerated. And perhaps how far as well we have emboldened to be able to, because of anonymity or the concept of anonymity or the hands-off feeling that you're not speaking to someone directly. And so because of that, you're then able to say whatever you want with seemingly no repercussions, with seemingly no... Yeah, and that is a very big problem. So I think ultimately with social media, I honestly don't think as well... I was watching a documentary a while ago called The Social Dilemma. I'm not sure if you've watched it.
Yeah, the one on Netflix. I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard very good things about it.
It is very telling. It just, I've always been averse to social media in a sense. Even when I started using it, I remember that I asked a friend of mine, Gibbons, Katule, if you're listening, thank you or no thanks for signing up and helping me open my account. But so ever since then, I've always just found it strange posting on social media. I've tried, even now, whenever I do, mostly I'll post about work. But after watching that and really seeing how these companies control and, how you see that in essence we are puppets.
Yeah.
Or we are set out to be puppets. Yeah. That is very scary.
So this is actually interesting. So there are two ways to look at this, right? If you look at, say, science, physics, natural science, right? So we had theories from, say, Albert Einstein and sort of that age where the prime of physics, right? We have Planck, we have all those smart guys. They come up with these interesting theories. They come up with these extremely... They come up with these extremely interesting theories, right? Of Einstein comes up with relativity and special relativity. Planck comes up with what is now named after him, Planck's constant, with quantum physics and all those introductions. But we don't know how to investigate this, right? We don't know how to experiment. In science, you can have like very beautiful math, but if you can't experiment, it's not actually science, right? Until a time where the technology is good enough for us to make those experiments, right? And today, if you look at the perspective of social science, we've also had all these theories, right? For example, right now, the biggest conversations is whether gender, for example, men are actually, whether gender is fluid, right? Or not. And what Google say and Facebook are these huge laboratories. Right now, we have the kind of the capacity, laboratory capacity to actually create those experiments. So now Google, since it has access to over 1 billion people, it can make actual social science repeatable experiments on people. And again, there's an ethical line there. But my perspective, I don't really agree with that perspective, but the one perspective is this is bringing social science to become more closer to real science as natural science is, right?
Yes.
And so most of people are definitely debating of whether this is ethical or not. But if you look at it from kind of progress in terms of technology, this looks like very promising.
Well, there were many points in there. I'm not sure which one exactly I should address. But if I was just to generally talk about the topic, I think, yes, if you're looking at science and you're looking at society, I don't think you can divorce the two from each other in the sense that science always moves with the time or always moves with what the people allow it to investigate or to be able to ascertain.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at how most of these companies use data to perhaps control, I think, yes, I definitely think that is very dangerous. But I also think, I don't know if we could have done it any other way. Because like most innovations, if you remember the creation of the atomic bomb, the time that it was created, we've always had research into nuclear physics. But that research has always been for good in terms of trying to get cheaper and more renewable forms of energy without actually destroying the environment. And nuclear energy is that kind of energy. But on the other hand, it also has the potential for destruction. You saw what happened to Hiroshima. And really, even now, whenever there's threat of a nuclear bomb or whenever there's threat of any nuclear retaliation, you have, all of us quake because we know that in an instant, we can fade away. The same way that happened with Avengers and Thanos, how the guy snapped his fingers. So, that's the power of nuclear energy. And that, I think, now is also the power of data, in the sense that every single human being who is in the online world has data collected about them, has data that tells who you are, what you do, what your preferences are. And the companies that hold this data are powerful. And when you go back perhaps to, one of the people that you mentioned, other than Einstein, perhaps, actually, yes, Einstein, and Darwin and most of these naturalists, you will realize that, for example, Darwin proposed or was a very big proponent of survival of the fittest, and was also a very big proponent of natural selection. And you're starting to see that now also again from data. Back in the early 2000s, there was research into, I think it was called the Human Genome Project, where they wanted to map our genes. So whenever you look at a human being, you're broken down into, of course, your body parts, and then those body parts are broken down into cells. Those cells are further broken down into genes. Now, those genes are the ones that carry information, like code.
The DNA, for
yes, if you look at code is numbers or letters. But if you look at programming language, JavaScript, and the rest, that is Python, that is all, they have arranged the letters into a language that we can understand and read. You, a coder, can be able to get a particular set of numbers or letters, and you're able to know that if you input them here like this and like this is the result that is going to come out. Now that's the same way that our DNA works, that our genes work. So I think that was in the early 2000s. They were able to map every single letter, every single number in your genome, and they're able to determine what makes you. And then companies like CRISPR, which then discovered that you could then be able to manipulate those genes, alter by either removing a defect or adding whatever you want to put there. And they did that by mimicking bacteria. Because bacteria works in the same way, in the sense that when you see a bacteria, if a virus was to come and try to attack a bacteria, what the bacteria does, it will quarantine the area. It will block it off, and the virus will be cut off, from the rest. So once it is there, then the bacteria will then map out the virus's DNA or its sequence, and it will keep it in its memory bank. Now, the next time any such virus comes in, it will already know that, this one already came, this is what happened. So it will cut it, isolate it, and then, of course, it will die out, because viruses like to replicate, which is funny because that's how human beings are as well. But anyway, so from that's how they're able to use the same technology by creating by using that same technology, create CRISPR or Cas9, which they're now using to cure blindness, to cure Alzheimer's, to cure HIV.
Rumors are that they're using similar technologies to clone people. For example, I've heard that there are very many, these are conspiracy theories. I've heard that there are very many Vladimir Putins.
Well, of course, no. You can't rule out the possibility of that happening. All I know, and which perhaps I will share with whoever is listening, is that when it came, especially when CRISPR was invented, and then you had everyone being able to create, to actually do gene editing from the comfort of their home or from the comfort of your garage. then governments, of course, were a little skeptic and were scared. So the UN, of course, came into play, because this now, whenever you're talking about anything to do with tampering, altering humanity, that becomes a problem of the world, or a problem of the universe, not just for one government or one particular entity. So there's a convention that was, I think in 2019, that is the Convention on Biodiversity, I forget the full name, where they agreed and they put a moratorium, that is a temporary hold or ban on any gene editing or on any cloning or anything of the sort. Yeah. But of course, like most decisions that are passed by international bodies, ultimately every country has its own sovereignty. So there are stories that there are scientists in China, for example. There's one scientist who apparently had created the first human beings that are free from HIV. And by using genes that had been manipulated. Of course, that has not yet also been confirmed, because the scientist has not come out to present these particular girls. Apparently, there are 2 twin girls. But already cloning is done with IVF. Whenever you're looking at intraviral fertilization, there are particular places like in Ukraine where you have a cell of you have cells from the mother and from the father, but then maybe perhaps if the two of you have a particular hereditary condition, or you need to strengthen the genes, they get another third party, a donor, and they inject some of those into that particular one, and then you have a child perhaps that doesn't have a neurological condition that you may have. So cloning has not, I believe honestly that yes, there are people who are, because the technology exists now, and that has been confirmed. The problem has been regulation, or has been money. Now, if someone has the money, and perhaps their laws are not stringent on that, because there's no country that has completely banned gene editing. No. I'm not aware of any at the moment. They have banned perhaps research into it, or further research into it, or they're making it difficult for people to do that. But most of the countries are using an evidence-based approach. Japan, even North Korea, Russia that you're mentioning, all of those do that.
This is the thing with the natural science, playing around with stuff like biology and stuff is a little bit more complex, a little bit more expensive. And so the risk factor there is you can pinpoint people who can afford to do that, right? And I think this has been the biggest success against the nuclear war, is because enriching uranium is very expensive, right? And so it has been easy for nuclear powers to actually monitor the world and see, is Gaddafi trying to enrich nuclear? Is Iran trying to do it? Because it's not something you can do in a small laboratory. You need significant infrastructure that can be detected from the satellites in space, right?
But that was the past. Because you see, now, as I've said, as the times keep advancing, all those things change. In the past, it would be unheard of to find out that diamonds could be created from a lab. But now diamonds can be created from a lab. So technology has gone so far, and people are finding cheaper and easier materials, again, using the same CRISPR and Cas9. Imagine, this is science fiction that we're talking about, where you're able to sit here in Uganda, in Kampala, and you're able to get a kit that is able to help you to create a breed of dog, or a new breed of cat that perhaps glows in the dark, that perhaps doesn't bark, meows. Imagine you hear a dog that meows. So even with that, uranium, perhaps even now, I'm sure there are other compounds that they have found. Chemistry, the same way with biology, the sciences really have advanced at such a stage, that the human mind is always trying to create, always trying to find out, always trying to make things easier. And that's a biological and scientific fact, even a religious fact. There's something in science called entropy, which basically goes with chaos, in the sense that entropy means that everything eventually dissolves. Everything will dissolve, everything will disappear. Now, that is the curse of creation. That is the curse of human beings, the curse of vegetation, the curse of animals. Everything will die, everything will fade away. So, as a human race, the best way to beat entropy was by replicating as fast as we could. That's why we're similar to bonobo monkeys and rats and most of these other animals. But because we have the need to stay on this earth, to keep recreating, to keep procreating, to keep creating copies of ourselves. But on the other hand as well, now because of entropy and because of all those rules of science and physics, human beings also want to find ways to be able to live longer, or to be able to beat or to cheat death, to be able to find better ways to live on the earth. And that's why innovation will always continue.
Yeah. Actually, to that same point, I think that if you look at tech, the info tech, right? And again, you already mentioned data. It's much easier, and yeah, you're right that even the hard natural sciences are more accessible now. But with data, it's much easier. So, for example, for me right now, right, I can create say community on Reddit, yeah, which I monitor and all that. Yeah, if I fetch all the data from that community, if I have it running say for 10 years, I can be able to use that data to build something equivalent to your psychology profile, right?
Yes.
And I can create a robot, which is just a computer program that can talk to someone who knows you as if it were you talking to them, right? And sort of this is where the kind of technology has reached, for, especially for people who share a lot on social media, right? Or share a lot publicly. Also, there's the technology with deepfakes, and I don't know how much you know about the deepfakes, but where I can find content of you out there, find other content and use this very good AI. And again, AI is just really exaggerated data science. Use this very good AI to map, say, your images to voices and images of other people, and it seems like it's them. And if it's well done, it's extremely hard to tell the difference. And it's also just the beginning. It's going to grow. Talk about what you see as dangers for that, because I see, for example, for deepfakes, I see in the court yesterday, this guy, the former president of NURP, claims that he didn't say, it wasn't very clear what his claims were. Maybe you'll also clarify that. But he claims that he didn't make the video about where he was saying that Bobby Wine owes him 5 million or whatever.
Okay.
Of course, the scenario most people are assuming is he was intimidated into making the video. The other option would be, we don't know that the army has deep fakes to get the guy
to be able to do that.
To get the guy to say things he doesn't actually want to say.
Well, I knew I would enjoy this conversation, especially after listening to other podcasts. But yes, I'm really passionate about this topic, artificial intelligence and the use of data. Okay, so as you mentioned, yes, data is at the core of everything. And that's why I believe data is a new oil. Well, not only myself, but it's been published everywhere. Data is at the center or the foundation of everything. And as I've explained, even when you look at science, data is at the core of you as an individual, of everything. It's all data. Now, when you come to artificial intelligence, as you mentioned, data has become so essential that it has now allowed or brought out other conversations, like with artificial intelligence, as you're saying. With artificial intelligence, you have two types. You have the general AI, and then you have I've forgotten the other term. But the general AI is basically the one that thinks for itself. That you just input particular inputs, you teach it, and then it after some time teaches itself. Now, in that particular example or classification, you have AI, like the ones that are now creating art. There's one that I was looking at the other day, which is called Ida Robot. Man, that thing blew me away. So this is a robot. This is an AI that has been programmed to draw and to paint. And it paints the same way that a painter, someone who's good at art, will be able to paint, in the sense that it's not that it is told, okay, do this and this. No, it's just given data. It's fed data, in the sense that, let's say they feed pictures of the whole of Kampala. And then they allow it, because of its programming, it's supposed to then draw whatever it feels it's going to come out. And it actually draws actual paintings and photos and pictures. There's one in particular that I was really impressed, where it created a painting that was worth $420,000. And of course, now the discussion is, can such AI, does it have liability? Can it own that particular painting? Or can it then, can it create? Can it innovate? Can it invent? And so there's a particular AI called Danube that applied for a patent to the European Patent Office, but the patent was denied. And the reasons, of course, were that although the AI, where it was seen that the AI was creating, but ultimately our laws do not yet allow AI to create, for two reasons. One, the liability aspect, in the sense that if you're looking at science, if you're looking at psychology, for example, if I was to give you an example, if you had a robot and a baby, and you had, let's say, the robot and the baby were on a cliff, and they were sitting there, and you're observing. And then the baby perhaps gets a stone and throws it over, and it hits a car or a rock, would you say that the baby knew what it was doing, or would you hold the baby liable? Yes?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't hold the baby
Okay.
liable, definitely.
What if the robot did the same thing, in the sense that it just got the stone and threw it, but let's say if it was playing with a baby, would you also hold the robot liable?
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely may not. I may probably hold the guy who built the robot liable.
Okay, so let me ask another question then. Even before you think deeper to that, let's say you have the baby and you know that AI has been programmed to take care of the baby.
Yeah.
And you know that it understands, it has particular algorithms, and it is taught that if the baby picks up a stone, you're supposed to hold it and not. Right? And you know that it understands those because perhaps it has been tested in the field, and you know and you understand.
Yes.
And then in that particular instance, perhaps the robot or the artificial intelligence makes a decision. And when the baby picks up the stone, the robot allows the baby to pick up the stone and throws the stone over. And the same thing happens. Would you, or the baby walks over the cliff and falls over. Would you then...
so you're saying the robot is doing something contrary to what I know it has been programmed to do?
Yes. In that particular instance,
yeah, definitely.
What would be your first reaction to the robot?
Well, as an engineer, again, I'm a dev. My assumption, but the first assumption would be that the robot is defected. It's maybe someone else has taken control of it, or we made a few mistakes in the programming. Yeah, the assumption, to get to the assumption that it has consciously decided to disobey its maker.
You see, you've used the term conscious, but is a robot conscious?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because you see, ultimately, whenever you're dealing with robots, now you go deeper into consciousness. And and that is the word that I wanted, in the sense that the questions you'll be asking yourself will be around consciousness.
Yeah.
A child, as far as we know, a baby does not have, although they are conscious, but they don't have that understanding, or the consciousness has not been honed to be able to perceive things the way that an adult would be. A robot, on the other hand, has its controls, but ultimately, according to our laws, as we still don't categorize or see robots as having consciousness.
Yeah.
We don't see them as things, either consciousness or unconsciousness. Because consciousness and unconsciousness go hand in hand. For the people that are awake or woke, let's say that they're conscious. And for everyone else, perhaps that is still living as a puppet or living in a world where you're not present in the now, then you're termed as unconscious. So a robot is seen as a thing. It's, it can't make choices. Again, if I was to look at philosophy, the words of Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre were the proponents of what we call existentialism. That word confuses me. Existentialism. Oh God, the spelling of that. Anyway, so they believe in choice, in the sense that choices are what make you. You have to have the ability to make a choice in order for you to have consciousness, in order for you to be a human being. And which is funny in the sense that there is also a philosopher called Descartes that said, the thing of I think, therefore I am. That is, in all honesty, to him, with all due respect, that is not true. In the sense that now, the deeper you go into consciousness, you now understand that thinking does not denote consciousness. Because for people that meditate, you understand you can sit without no mind for hours and hours. Does that mean the person is dead? Does that mean the person is in another realm? Those are other questions. But now I've gone further. Hopefully we can have a discussion about that.
No, but that's true. Let's actually first...
No, but I need to finish the question.
Okay, please, go ahead.
Otherwise the listeners will be confused
it's all good.
when we keep jumping from one thing to another.
Yeah, go ahead.
So now, going back to artificial intelligence, those are the questions that we're asking now. And the answer currently is no, AI does not have consciousness. That is one. On the point of liability, as in terms of the law, of course, you need to either be a person or you have corporate personality in order to be liable. So currently we have vicarious liability. That's why you say the designer or the developer will be the one who will be liable or liable vicariously. And even in terms of applying for a patent or getting the money, it's the inventors who are still the ones earning the money, but not for long. Honestly, I think that will change.
True.
So the question of artificial intelligence is quite big now. That also brings in deepfakes, which is now on the other side, in the sense that artificial intelligence has evolved so much, or technology in that particular space has evolved so much that deepfakes exist. So that example that you are giving, yes, very much so, it could be an example of a deepfake. Deepfakes are all over the internet. Actually, those are the algorithms that are now putting TikTok into trouble, because people can create videos and people can be able to superimpose their faces or their full bodies or voices as well. That's how movies are able to create CGI characters from someone who is dead. If you remember Fast and Furious, how they put Paul Walker. So deepfakes have been used for good in such instances where you're entertained even after someone has passed on. but also used for bad, especially when in this world, as I said, where fake news has permeated our societies. So and there are several cases that have come up where that has happened, and the discussion around AI actually is focused around deepfakes as well, because ultimately it doesn't matter how you program AI, but if AI is programmed with a set of rules as human beings, trust me, if you look at society from where we started from up to where we are now, I don't think that anyone foresaw would be exactly where we are.
Yeah.
But the human mind wants to discover, always wants to to create new things, always wants to move further. And I think that's the same thing with AI. I watched a movie the other day called Her. I don't know if you've watched it.
Yeah, I watched it. Well, I watched it some time back, but I watched
that
Her.
movie. Honestly, is I think it will be like Back to the Future, all those movies that are predicted what is going to happen in the future.
Let's first talk about this whole evolution of sort of the conscious truth, right?
Okay.
So before we are as intelligent, or before humanity has acquired as much information as we have now, we believed that there is a God somewhere who, sort of the way we believe in scientific truth right now, is the same way we believed in the God, right? And I'm not saying anything against religious people believe in God. I'm just saying that the way we believe in God today has differed, is very different from how, say, the people, maybe if those Moseses actually lived, how they believed, right? And then at some point, civilization starts to grow a little bit more, and we start to believe in the state. And we say we have an institution called the state, and we have the religion. The religion can preach its God, but in matters that are practical, let us assume the state will handle that, right? If we need a road built, it's not, we don't have to pray. We have to just have the right leaders, right? Things like that, and that evolved, yeah. And today, it looks like the state is also facing some of the challenges that it can handle. And one of them is this alternative truths, right? Because most of the senses that we have as humans to detect what the truth is, looking at people's expressions, looking at people's images, all those can be faked. Actually, right now, Mark Zuckerberg is working on that hologram thing with his VR technology, right? And so you'll be able to wear that VR technology and play with your friends in the sitting room. You're just alone in the sitting room, but you can play and drink and eat with your friends when they're in their places, wherever they are, right? So that would have made the COVID pandemic not so bad, right? But in a scenario where I can hack your party, right? You throw your party, I hack your party because, say, you're an opposition leader, for example, yeah? I hack your party, I take on your wife's face, and then I come and have all these intimate conversations with you, and I get to know your secrets that I'm going to use to the politics, yeah? So I'm thinking the world where the truth right now, it cannot be confirmed by what I say or what I see. That was Jay-Z. Believe half of what you see and nothing of what you hear, right? The truth right now is going to become Jay-Z's truth, the hood's truth. You can't believe anything. Are we going into a world where sort of true consciousness is sort of decentralized? And I'm going to also sneak in blockchain right now. So blockchain is this technology that is decentralizing power as we know it, right? If you look at finance, for example, we know that the source of truth is an institution like the bank, right? So you have the bank where if I want to make a transaction with, say, you, I will tell the bank, and the bank will tell you if it's a valid transaction or not, right? But with technologies like blockchain, I'm able now to do that directly with you. And we are using all this fancy mathematics to prove that this is actually true, right? Isn't this going to be the next stage of true, like, I don't know the right word, but the version of truth in terms of consciousness, right? Where we don't need, where it's a peer-to-peer validation, right? So if any news comes up that say Bobby Wine did this bad thing, by default, say my grandchildren will not believe that unless they're having a one-on-one conversation with Bobby Wine and they are validly sure that this is the Bobby Wine.
That's a very loaded question, man. There's several.
I didn't know how to make it simpler, but yeah, just talk about it.
Okay, hopefully I will be able to answer everything that you brought in there, but I'll start perhaps from the first thing. Maybe first we need to understand what consciousness is. So consciousness is a very elusive term. From millennia, from the time the Earth or the universe began, we have all tried to understand consciousness. Did it exist before the Earth or the universe began? It doesn't matter what worldview you look at. So scientists believe the Earth or the universe was created as a result of the Big Bang. But what they cannot reconcile, okay, so the Big Bang, for those listening that would be interested in that, they believe that two beams of light were traveling at very fast speeds that we cannot fathom, collided, and then they created reactions, and that those debris, or from that collision, are what created the known universe. Now, that was confirmed in the 60s. No, it started from the 60s, where there's a scientist called Peter Higgs and his colleague, I forget his name, where they theorized that the universe was created as a result of the Big Bang, and the Earth again was created in particular as a result of reactions where the debris from the collisions of light created the Earth, and which had its own mass. Now, that was confirmed later on, when scientists built what they call the Large Hadron Collider, which is in CERN in Switzerland. So the collider basically recreates the conditions that perhaps existed at the time of the Big Bang, in the sense that they created a vacuum, a tube that at vacuum had nothing, and then they let light travel at perhaps at the same speed that or the fastest speed that they could be able to come up with. So throughout their very many experiments, they kept seeing those debris which would collide, and then of course entropy would take effect, where the things would dissolve. So eventually, they then, at certain time, when they created the experiment, I don't remember what conditions they were on that particular day, but they collided, the particles formed.
The Higgs Boson, I think they call it.
The God particle was formed. So the one of the particles just stayed. Imagine just if I got water and I poured it here, and then one of the drops of water just stayed. Wouldn't that blow your mind?
Exactly.
Now, that's what happened, and that's what actually confirmed that the universe was created as a result of the Big Bang, and that's how we're able to get mass. Because later on, gravity was also created as a result, or came into play, and then all these other forces, all came up and created the mess that we have, or the organization that we have now. So that is on the one part. Of course, science religion, Christianity, I am a Christian, believes that the earth was created by God, and that the first man and the first woman were Adam and Eve. But again, it's only as far as it is, because the question that I used to ask myself is, okay, so how was God created then? But now, going back to science cannot also reconcile what happened before the Big Bang.
Actually can. Let me first interrupt you, sorry. But so the question of the Big Bang, if you want to look at creating of the universe from the Big Bang perspective, right, you have to reconcile with right now I think the most agreed upon model of quantum theory is what I call the standard model, the thing that goes into string theory and all that weird science, right?
And the assumption, the electromagnetic force and the weak force.
Exactly. And the assumption here is the idea of time, right? So if you want to look at the universe if you want to look at the Big Bang as the beginning, you want to look at the Big Bang as the beginning of time, right?
No, I'm not looking at that. You see, ultimately, as I've said, I believe that the Big Bang is what created the universe. But as I mentioned before, I have not seen anywhere
let me first
that shows
clarify
what
my
happened
thought.
Before the Big Bang.
No, exactly. So what time, the scientific concept, right? This thing we measure with our clocks. If you want to look at, first suspend a thought that maybe the Big Bang is when we start counting. This is when T is equal to 0. I'm going to explain to you why that is important, right? So they say this, whatever happens, and the Big Bang, and then time starts, right? But if you look at this standard theory, what the standard theory claims is our limitations as human, as intelligent, and this also goes into entropy. I think there is the second law of thermodynamics says that entropy will keep increasing, blah blah blah. But that is actually not science, because it doesn't really say anything about the world, right? What most people claim is it is a limitation of our intelligence, right? It's just ignorant that if say I crash a glass, it is not going to chances are very low that, again, this is also statistically true. If I throw maybe 1 billion glasses, one of them will form itself in a chair, say something like that, right? Those are the laws of entropy. But the assumption that the other forms that are not comprehensible by human beings, the scatters that we think are more chaotic, it's not because they're chaotic, but just because they're unintelligible, right? If there was some intelligence from somewhere else, that would have been perfect order for it, something that for us we see as sort of chaos, right? And again, how this blends into the whole Big Bang thing is, what if our universe is not the only universe, right? Because our universe right now lives with multiple weird, unexplainable constants, right? Like the speed limit, right? The speed of light is the fastest anything in this universe can go, right? Well, that's actually not true, but apparently when you go beyond the speed of light, the whole idea of cause and effect dissolves. The time doesn't happen, right? And so that is the assumption also made before the Big Bang is, what if there were things, I don't know the right concept to use, but say these things are moving beyond the speed of light, right? And they don't have an idea of time because, again, they're moving beyond the speed of, there's no cause and effect. Things just happen. What human intelligence would consider to be total, pure random chaos, right? And one of these things collide, and what happens out of that is our universe, right? And that means right now more universes are getting created, right? More Big Bangs are happening in some whatever weird super universe out there. And so that is, and again, most of this again is very theoretical, and probably our great grandchildren will be able to prove or disprove it. But what this tries, the advantage of thinking within this perspective is killing the supernatural cause of life or cause of existence, right? And the reason for that is, I think I forget the philosopher's name, but there's that very funny philosophical joke about what is the earth standing on. And this guy says the earth is standing on an elephant. And they ask him, what is the elephant standing on? And he says, it's standing on a tortoise. And then they ask him, but what is the tortoise standing on? And he says, it's tortoises all the way, right? and the thing is, at some point you just have to get a concept, work with it, and you don't have to understand it. Yeah. And God has worked for a very long time, right? As that concept, how was the world created? God created the world. Who created God? Don't ask that. That was usually what parents say, don't ask that. It's a sin to ask that. That is, it's tortoises all the way, right? But today we've done some experiments, and we know for sure that Earth, first of all, is not the center of what we call to be the universe, right? We've done experiments, know for sure that what we think the universe is expanding, right? So that means, there's something out there, obviously. It's expanding into something, right?
Okay.
So there's all that science that makes some of the claims in say, spirituality and say Christian teachings, which were feasible at the time they were written, in practical right now, right? Like 7-day thing, like creating light before you create the sun and things like that. Yeah, there's that contradiction. So, but now we know for sure that the sun is this plasma of nitrogen and helium and whatever, things like that. And yeah, so we know a little bit more about the world today, and our children are going to know a little bit about the world today. And the whole scientism dogma thing is to force children to find out instead of believing that it's tortoises all the way down, find out what the tortoise is standing on, what the next tortoise is standing on, until like as the cause of life.
Well, as you mentioned, I think for most of us, of course, because as I've said, it's the rules or the laws of physics, the laws of biology. Yeah. We look at time in a linear manner. In a sense that we look at it as chronological. That's how our watches work. That's how we're able to perceive things as we perceive. So there's something in there. Some of the Buddhist teachings talk about one, impermanence, talk about non-self, and then equanimity. So I'll try and talk about those in relation to science and in relation to what I was talking about before or what you brought out. So as you rightly pointed out, Einstein was the first to determine that there is a disconnect, or there is a similarity, or there is using a disconnect and similarity as two different terms, that there is a relation between space and time, but they're also different in the sense that time and space exist differently. And that was the general theory of relativity, where they discovered that light in particular travels differently, or is perceived differently by someone who is in space or someone who is down on Earth. And from that's how we're able to determine. I think they did an experiment where they put twins. One twin was in space and one twin was on Earth. And when they then use an atomic clock, which is the most accurate clock to the T, they determined that time was moving slower for the twin that was in space than for the person that was down. But ultimately, we're all in the same space, or seemingly in the same space. So there's a term that I forget. I'd written it down. Perhaps I will look for it later. Where what you said before, in the sense that we believe that everything has cause and effect, but there are particular places like space where there's not necessarily any cause and effect. Things just are. Now, as long
in
as
this
that
universe.
yes, in this particular universe, I will look it up
Okay,
and I will show it to you. But going back, so with how I say the Big Bang, now I don't believe in time. I don't look at time in a linear manner. At least not when I'm thinking about these things.
Okay.
I look at time in the sense that I cannot perceive time because ultimately I have limitations as a human being. I was created to perceive things the way that we perceive them. Because ultimately the reason why we're able to see that this is a microphone, this is a chair, this is the ground, this is we're looking at other people, we're looking at the sky, is because we have we're looking at things in a seemingly objective manner, but it is subjective to the human race. In a sense that we're both using eyes, we're both using ears, noses, ears.
I totally
so how
agree.
can we then conceive something different if we don't know
how
to look for something outside what we can see or what we can perceive? And that's why it's a possibility that perhaps we're dreaming. And that's where consciousness is, goes deeper in the sense that what if all this matter is not actually matter? Because if you look at people, Christ in the Bible, or other people that have been able to walk on water and to bend matter and to do things that seem impossible, most of that has come from the mind. Now, for most people, of course, and that's why most people believe that consciousness exists in the mind. But when you go deeper, especially into spirituality, you then realize that we're all connected as the world. And that's why I said, even if science can, has brought experiments that are able to show the Big Bang and able to show how universe started and date back and know that the Earth has been there for over 1.6 billion years or so, or the dinosaurs existed, or or anything of the sort, science has not yet reconciled or has not yet answered the question as to perhaps could there have been something that precipitated the Big Bang? Perhaps is the time a loop? In the sense that maybe it is the future experiments that have been done in the future that have then gone, then went back and actually created the world, and everything is, some sort of loop. That's what cannot be reconciled. Now, when you go to religion, when you look at Buddhism, when you look at Christianity, when you look at Islam, when you look at the Hindus, all of those preach one thing: love. That's where it all comes down to. And for anyone that's ever tried these mind-altering drugs, LSD or anything like that, anyone that has gone on a trip where they saw mushrooms, the one thing that keeps coming out is love. In the sense that love is what exists beyond all those things. So if love exists beyond those things, then could God be love? Or could love have existed even before the Big Bang, before that? Because ultimately, honestly, if you look at how perfect a leaf is, how perfect the sky is, and how everything operates on a certain law, how you can look at ants making a formation and building an anthill, who gives them that drive? Who put that set of instructions? As I told you, our genes are a set of instructions. If you look at computer code, AI cannot be how it is if it didn't have one person first inputting a certain set of instructions that will then allow it to create other things and other things. So when you look at it from that particular perspective, who created humanity? Who created consciousness? Does consciousness exist outside these particular laws? What happens after we die? Perhaps does consciousness, is it free? Does it go into another realm? Those are all questions that we cannot readily answer now, and science has not provided the questions.
No, I think I totally agree.
Yes, but when you look at religion, when you look at spirituality, when you look deeper into self, because for example, if I'm using meditation, if you meditate, you realize that if I was to sit down and clear my mind and have no mind, ultimately you realize that thoughts sometimes creep up into the no mind state, but you watch those thoughts. So who is watching? Because ultimately, as I said before, we always thought that thoughts are what make you. And if I asked another person, when was the last time you thought thinking? For them, it would be a very illogical thought. That what? You mean you can be there without thinking? But I have just given you a scenario. I have done it personally. I meditate every day, every morning, and I'm able to see that I can visualize and see my thoughts. Or I can quieten my mind and not have anything. So where is that consciousness? So I then also determine that consciousness does not exist only in the mind, but it's in the heart, it's in the body. There are particular states that the Hindus believe, in the sense that you have the part in your brain or in your head, which is the intellectual part, or the intellectual chakra, as they call it. Then you have the emotional one, which is in your heart. Then you have the one that is in your gut, the one that allows you to think instinctively, the one where they tell you, follow your gut. Now, for most of us, we live our whole lives where those three are unaligned. And that's what perhaps causes us all the problems that are caused. And again, when we have the discussions of consciousness, you cannot be fully conscious unless those three are aligned, because that's when you're awake, that's when you're able to stay in the now. Now, going further into some of the questions that you asked, since we still don't know what consciousness is, but ultimately I can say that consciousness is what pays attention. That's, I think, the best way to be able to describe it.
Yeah.
It's your attention. Because ultimately, if you pay attention to something, then consciousness exists. If you can't pay attention to something, then consciousness does not exist. Now, if you go to AI, can't AI pay attention? If AI can be able to listen, keep quiet, internalize, and pay attention to one particular thing and finish it, honestly, hasn't it then discovered consciousness? Isn't it going to the realm of consciousness? Now, going down as well to social orders. As I've said, well, we've packed so many things into that, so I'm not sure
It's
if
okay.
I'll
I don't think we need a format. Just
okay. So going deeper into society, as you had mentioned, in regards to whether we shall be. I think we're using the wrong term when we're talking about consciousness in that sense. In a sense, there I'm looking at perhaps rules. Because if you look at communism, I forget the exact term. I really don't like labels, so most times I forget. But there was, what's this famous Chinese guy, Mao Zedong, that was one of the proponents of. I forget the exact term, but it is akin to communism in the sense that where you have a sense of responsibility to your community. And the best example that I'll give is if you're fighting a war with another country. For example, if we then had a war with any of our neighbors, and then would it be justified to kill a neighbor? They're a human being. But in the sense of if you're protecting your country or protecting your community, what Mao Zedong preached was that you needed to have a sense of responsibility towards your community and towards your people. So ultimately, everything was paying tribute to the social order. That's how you're able to perform or able to live in a particular community. But now, if you go back to religion, or if you go back to liberalism or capitalism, if you're to tie it to that, most of the societies now believe that you need to first work on yourself, in the sense that you need to sit with yourself, that equanimity, where you sit with the good and the bad, and you're able to then be a human being. Take care of yourself first before you can take care of another person. And that's what they use even in aeroplanes. If you notice, when for those things that what you call the masks, they tell you first put the mask on your child if you have a child before you put it on yourself. So that is the best example that I can be able to use in terms of these other societies, where they say that you first work on yourself. There's first a sense of responsibility to yourself and perhaps to your values. And that's how you're able to say that if I'm fighting with another country, I'm able to know that if I am attacked, then I will attack. But before I am attacked, I should first sit and listen and understand it's a human being who is suffering the same way that I am suffering. Perhaps ultimately, if I'm to dig deeper, I won't even understand why I'm fighting with my neighbor. And that's what will form peace. That's what will also help. But on the flip side, that sense of individualism has also created selfishness. And that's how you have societies where you have a divide between the rich and the poor. Because ultimately, if people are furthering their own interests, then you'll never have that sense of reconciliation. There are societies where there's a middle ground, in the sense that they allow individualism and then they also allow that sense of community. I can't honestly think of an example where that has worked perfectly, because I don't think any such place exists in the earth. Maybe perhaps in death, as I said, if that is another realm, but in this particular set of rules, no. So when you're talking about society in that particular example and in the rules, in the examples that you gave, blockchain and the rest, people are now less trusting of systems and societies. People are then, I think, going deeper into self, into capitalism, into that. That's why social media has become so big, because someone can sit in the comfort of their own home, interact with the world, but with the comfort of knowing that, look, I am sitting in my home. I don't need to sit in a building and be able to share my particular views. Now, that has been dangerous in the sense of blockchain will work. Because if you're looking at decentralized networks, and because of the distrust in the system, in the man, where you know that you want to be able to perform your transactions without that particular oversight, or without having to pay tribute to a particular society or a particular establishment, that will perhaps also create problems. But although, honestly, I think now the technology, even with blockchain, it's now seemingly coming back in the sense that now even with Libra, you remember when Libra had launched, they were talking about completely decentralized systems. But now when we're looking at Libra, they're saying, okay, now we're thinking of creating a fiat-based or fiat-backed currency, which is backed by paper money or backed by gold reserves, which is seemingly also playing to the rules of capitalism or the rules that exist now. As I've said, you packed so many things into
no,
your
it's
questions.
fine. It's
I'm
fine.
not really sure
this
what
is
I've
extremely
answered.
interesting. It's okay. I think this is interesting. And so when it comes to how I'm personally thinking about the blockchain, I think it's radical, right? Sort of that way. It's not actually entirely new, right? But it's bring it to finance, for example, is very, very radical, right? Because first of all, the risk that some people we don't, like you and I, don't want to have money. The terrorists, right? We don't want them to have money.
Yes.
Yeah. So those people may have access to the global transfer of money, and that could be dangerous for everyone involved, right? But also the sense that we have to find where the limit is between me not wanting terrorists to have money, but also me not wanting Museveni to know how much I am worth, right? So there's that limit between my privacy and my security, right? And when I think of the blockchain, it has come, and I'm also going to, but this is how we're going to talk, I think, because there's no other way. I'm going to divert a little bit to the sense of complexity. You mentioned a little bit about chaos theory and whatnot. Yeah. So this sense of complexity, complex adaptive system, is the idea that you can't find a sort of utopic state, right? Where, say, you have one ideology like communism, and it can create
Let me look for that as you ask. Yes,
and it creates like a utopia, rather an equilibrium. I think John Nash, he has a Nobel Prize for having that weird economic theory that I don't think really works in the real world. But the whole concept of being that the blockchain has come today and the society is as complex as is, it is going to find multiple interests, right? Everyone wants their own thing, right? And the way this gets reconciled is we introduce it with the regulations, right? And slowly as years go on, again, for our grandchildren, the regulations may not make sense then, right? Because at that point, we'll be wondering, if I can send you money, why do I what? We put regulations to maybe bankrupt, some terrorists, right? But right now, probably we've killed all of them. We don't have any terrorists. Yeah. So then the reason for regulations goes away. And that can't be right now. And I know when the idea came and the way the guys, the pseudonym is Satoshi, the way he brought it up with a Bitcoin, with anonymity, I think that there was some bit of scariness around it because, he didn't want to associate himself with it. And I feel like it was still a money trick. He wanted to get his money in peace and something like that. But whatever his incentive was, when it comes and even the creator is sort of signaling that this is not for this time, the world starts to fear, right? And that is why the phobia came around it and ended up, Bitcoin, for example, ended up becoming this speculative currency instead of like real value currency that can work, right? And I think that we just have to give it time. We let Libra, say, for example, what Mark is doing with Libra, let it come with the regulations. And then the next generation, they fight off a few regulations until we get to a place where it is total decentralization. And people are looking at this in terms of how money is going to evolve going forward. But for me personally, I feel this is how society is going to evolve. If you look at, is it Switzerland or Sweden? Switzerland, yeah? They have these, their bottom-up kind of leadership, right? So you have these small villages. The villages make decisions that in the villages move their decisions to the district, and the district moves its decision to the whatever, regional, nation, or whatever. And they don't have a president. They just have this council of people whose job is to listen to what's coming from down. And I'm sure it's not perfect, but as ideologically, what I think is more suitable for the future we're going for is that, where we don't have one central government, even with strong institutions, even with the US, I think we've seen right now that what the US is doing is also not that good anyway. Yeah, we don't have one strong central government trying to make decisions from a central perspective, right? We are trying to be considerate or whatever, depending on the goodness of people. We can actually build institutions that don't need trust, that don't care about how good people that are involved are. And again, that there's with that complex adaptive system science, it's done at the University of Santa Fe, I think, mostly. I think it's now becoming very common. What they're doing is studying how, for example, in economics and most of this financial betting, stock exchange and stuff, what they're trying to do is study how people with multiple differing interests would interact if they need to, right? Like say on financial betting, people who need hospitals, people who need to make just money to put money in their pocket, people who need whatever everyone needs. They come together in this financial thing and exchange services and money, and then you come up with what people at Wall Street are doing. And what basically they do is bet on what stock is going to grow tomorrow or the next day, depending on how much data they have about what each individual interested party has, right? And I think if you move that away from finance into like general society as a whole, that is a more sustainable way of a self-sustaining society where I have my own interests, you have your own interests. Maybe you want to build a road, yes, but me, I don't want tarmac because my demons don't allow tarmac, my superstitions and things like that. And then we have to find a way of working together, even in conflict, right? And this means either we both compromise or, you get a gun and kill me, things like that. And that is sort of the way of nature. And when I look at Buddhism, I've also done a little bit of meditation, but from my own personal insights, again, when I see what this all means to me, sort of when I come out of it and I start to reflect, it doesn't, and I've had the conversation of love, I've had, like you mentioned, and that makes a lot of sense, right? But for me, I feel like what this whole here now means is this is what it is. It doesn't really mean anything, right? Today you go, something bad happens, that's what it is, right? There's nothing deeper to reflect on about it. Again, that is just my personal perspective, right? Because I've tried to, I almost got to a point where I had a drug dependency problem because I was trying to find that actual meaning. What is it that, that it is, who am I, for example, the self and all that. And for me, it came like, this is it. Like, I come and talk to you, I go back home, and it seems like nihilist a little bit, but to me, I see it as content, this is all I have. But yeah, again, in a society where, say, people are slightly tilting towards nihilism, but not as in I don't care about everyone else, I care about the things that I can control.
Okay.
And a society where it's more decentralized, where you don't have a higher power to look up to. There is no God, there is no government, there is no Museveni, there is nothing. It's just me. I make my decisions. I have enough information because now we have the technology, by the way, to disperse that information, right? Everyone in every village right now can know, if they are interested, they can know Uganda's constitution. They can know, like, most of the information they need to survive, right? And if I have access to that information, I can make my own decisions and have maybe a central system, a software. And since I'm a software engineer, I totally want a world where software rules the world. Software that, makes the consensus for us, right? So I put in my interest, everyone puts in his interest, and then what we have to do is debate on what the algorithm is. That is the world I see that's much better. Yeah. I don't know. Let's maybe switch on, unless you want to say something to this, but
that's the thing. I'm not sure what to respond to exactly.
It's just that.
Okay, perhaps maybe I'll start with what you mentioned in terms of the nihilism and that Buddhism and the rest. Okay, so most times whenever people talk about meditation, we link it to Buddhism, but meditation has nothing to do with Buddhism. Meditation is really just a form of stopping your thoughts, of paying attention. Yeah. Really, not stopping, but paying attention to your thoughts. It's just attention. When you're praying, for the Christians that pray, that is meditation. For the people that jog, when you jog and you're just focusing on your run, that is meditation. So what Buddhism does is perhaps also provide that foundation, all the values. So in Christianity, there's a premise called Imago Dei, which means that we're all made in the image of God, but not made in the image in the sense that when you put my face and God's face, they're like, no, in terms of our values. Yeah. So morality, ethics, goodness, love. So Imago Dei presupposes that those attributes are imbued in our DNA, in our genes, in our essence, in our being. And that's what essentially makes us who we are. And that's how we're able to be or to exist in the image of God. But that is that side. Now, what Buddhism also has foundations. And some of those foundations, I can summarize them in 3 things, which I mentioned before. 1 is impermanence. Number 2 is non-self. Number 3 is nirvana. So I'll try and explain that. Impermanence is basically the belief that everything passes away. Now, again, you'd think that, and for most people, as you said, they think that unconsciously, in the sense that that's where nihilism comes in the sense where you believe that, you know, nothing is organized, nothing is permanent, so why should I do anything? So the extreme nihilists, and then most of us, honestly, I think, are on the cusp of nihilism, but perhaps that's why religion is important, because it gives you something to believe in, rather than you not believing in anything. It opens your mind, but still allows your mind to be tethered to something sort of or seemingly tangible, something that your heart can feel. So when you're looking at impermanence, or what the Buddhist believers have said is everything dissolves, everything is impermanent. And that is also reinforced by science, as I mentioned. Because as I said, science believes in matter and existence, in rules and all these things, but also believes in entropy, in the sense that everything eventually dissolves. The earth will end. We know that the sun, which is our source of life at the moment, at a certain moment will implode or will turn into a black hole. We don't know when that will be, but that is going to happen at a certain point in our timeline or in the universe's timeline. So that is one. So the second is the non-self, where you sort of put yourself out of yourself, where you don't consider this vessel, this body, as something that should hold you, or something that should limit you. So non-self is a really important aspect of Buddhism, and of spiritual practice, because it allows you to practice what we call self-observance, where you look at the ego, you see the ego for what it is. So if for those of you that are into spirituality, you'd know that the ego is actually the biggest blind spot, or the main blind spot that humans have, in a sense that even in the Bible it talks about it, where they say, you know, before you pick a stick from someone's eye, first pick a log from your eye. That is the ego, which presupposes that ultimately it is, I am good, I am kind, I am a person who doesn't do no wrong, I am all these things. But it's very easy for me to see Kenneth there and say, no, Kenneth is bad, Kenneth is doing this or doing like that. So non-self allows you to move past that, to see the ego for what it is. To see the ego for what it is, and to decide that I'm not going to allow the ego to rule me. I'm going to remove that sense of self. And that then allows you to live, that goes to the third thing, which allows you to live in the now. Allows you to live with equanimity, that the balance of the good and bad, in the sense that, like a human being, just like, speaking for myself, I'm like everyone else. You mentioned the issue of you, or at one point almost getting dependent on medicines, on drugs. That is all of us, in the sense that we're always looking for something to dull our pain, to end our suffering. And that then allows us to always think either in the past or in the future. But that also ties down to chemistry, how our brains work. Our brain work, you mentioned it, in duality, in binary, in twos, good and bad, this and that. I will be there, I was there. Very few times do we actually live in the now, where we actually answer questions in the now. So even going back to all the questions that were, all the scenarios that you brought out, where you're saying perhaps this is not the time. Again, I don't believe in such a thing that this is not the time. Ultimately, if something is happening now, it is in the now. That means this is the time. And it's only when we label it in such a way, or we try to put it further, that's what delays innovation in most particular instances. I see. The third for the Buddhists is nirvana, that sense of reaching that sense of enlightenment, where you seek for peace, but where you find peace without actually then looking for, not wanting to look for it in the future. So nirvana exists in the now. That's the sense of enlightenment. Even the Buddha, apparently the Buddha had trekked for years and years, and trying to find enlightenment. And how he found it was finally when he went and sat under a tree and got rest. And that's when he had no mind for several hours. And at that particular point, he then realized that everything, first of all, will pass away, but everything exists. Everything that was is. So time no longer appeared as a concept. Everything was in that particular moment, and that is enlightenment. And for most of us, honestly, we spend our whole lives seeking or trying to attain enlightenment. And even for the spiritual teachers that we listen to, somehow, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they also want you to strive for that. Christianity or religion, whenever we're listening to pastors, the one thing they keep talking about is keep storing your riches in heaven. Keep storing your riches in heaven. But how many of them actually say, live your life now? Maybe perhaps even heaven exists from here, in the sense in the now, because that's why you are created. There's a reason why all these things exist. And that's why I believe having the values either of Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, all of them teach the same thing. That sense of having that enlightenment, but by bettering yourself and trying to see who you are and what you are. So in society, I believe that at a certain point, perhaps we shall reach a critical mass where you'll have, more people meditating, more people taking care of themselves, more people understanding these concepts of consciousness and understanding that in order for you to be awake, you need to pay attention. Because it's the same thing as if you go to the toilet and you're going for a short call. For the men, I hope this is not a PG
no
thing, but whenever you're going for a short call, you find that if you're not paying attention, you'll end up peeing all over the place. It's only when you pay attention that you end up. That's why they say that those things in the bathrooms, in things where they say aim well or aim well. So that also goes to life in the sense that if we don't pay attention to what we're doing, our thoughts will be all over the place, and in a sense, the cause and effect is what takes place now in life, because I also believe in cause and effect, that what you do affects, your actions will affect what is going to happen next, what happens after that, and so on and so forth. So whatever you do, you need to have that at the back of your mind. And that also, again, goes to society. Now, going back to technology, as we're talking about, if you look at blockchain, and in the sense that it is decentralized, and that's how governments have also become. Because I've also realized that, of course, you cannot keep power in a sense. If that is a dictatorship, and most times that has happened, it has not worked out. You either end up trumping human rights, or you have a society that's unhappy, and ultimately that goes down to the I think, I've forgotten if it's a second. You talked about the laws of thermodynamics. The second is that free energy will always flow into chaos energy. The third, I think, is that the energy that exists in this particular realm or universe is sufficient, in a sense that the energy we have is what it is, and that's the one we keep growing. And that's why, especially in physics, when you look at kinetic energy, all those now the laws of
I think that's the first
of physics and laws of thermodynamics, that an action will have an equal and opposite
Newton's laws.
And then the other one is that a motion, or an object, will always stay in motion unless an external force comes and does that. All those prove or confirm that energy it flows. That's how you're able to kick a ball, in a sense that a ball is static, but the energy from your foot is transferred into the ball, which then moves. And that's why if you didn't kick a ball too hard and it hits you on the chest, that will be very painful, because that energy has transferred from your foot to the football to you as well. So it's that, that cycle. Everything moves in that particular cycle. And everything operates like that. As I've said, there were several things, and I'm really passionate about
I
this
think
topic.
this is okay.
So I really apologize to listeners if we're all over the place.
No,
but
they'll have to bear with us until we bring ads. They just take what we give them for now.
Okay.
Anyway, So but this is, I think, interesting. Let's switch a little bit away from the deep conversations and talk about the nature of stories. It may not be as sort of light as maybe we want, but for example, if you look at Africa, Africa, which has been the target of colonialism and slavery, at least the latest target, we realize that some of the stories, the archetypical stories that we tell in Africa, have been overshadowed by the stories from the West or stories from the East. I think we still, especially from the Muslims, right? They still believe in some of the Arabic stories about jinns and things like that, right? So if you look at Africa, we no longer have the identity African story. Apart from this neo-liberal African story of an African victim, because, which is valid, we've been misused by other races mostly, but we don't have that original, I read about the Bachuezi story recently to sort of remember what they were teaching us, but it's also not an African it feels to me it's a Western story, a story of demigods. It's similar to the Greek stories. The Bachuezi story, is similar to the Greek myths. What is that impact on the identity, on our identity today?
That's a very big one. I've written extensively on cultural identity and on cultural heritage. So again, this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. I think identity is important, because identity denotes a sense of belonging. And all of us as human beings, we want to belong.
Yeah.
That's how we're made. Again, if you're going back to Imago Dei or anything else, that sense of belonging also exists. That's why we seek for all these things. You either want to belong to a religion, to belong to a particular society, a particular race, a particular tribe. It's that sense of belonging that actually drives us. Now, if you go deeper into what has happened to Africans, again, I like first putting context and starting from the foundations. If you go back to the beginning of time, in a sense that as mentioned, the Earth has been here for 1.6 billion years, and of that time, we have lived on this Earth as Homo sapiens for about 300,000 years. Of that, 200,000 of those we've been hunter-gatherers, in the sense that we lived by collecting and hunting. So from that time, of course, we lived in societies, but were freer in the sense that there was more freedom in terms of how we interacted with other people. Although there was still skepticism whenever you interacted with another tribe or whenever you interacted with another kind of person. But ultimately, the prejudices that we have now, I don't think existed in their severity as they did perhaps during that particular time. But then, of course, necessity, because I also believe necessity played a very strong role in the sense that as Africans, how many times have you been here and have you thought, okay, I need to store food for the winter? I need to store food for the next time.
Okay.
You do have famine, and famine exists, and then I cannot downplay that. But ultimately, for most of Uganda, for most of Africa, we're blessed that we have bountiful harvests.
God has been taking care of us.
Now, going back to Darwin, that believed that for man to evolve or for society to evolve, there has to have been necessity, survival of the fittest.
Not just selection.
Now, when you look at the Europeans or the British that came to conquer us or came to colonize us, the reasons why they did was they were looking for more resources. They were looking for more. Necessity is what drove them.
I see.
And I honestly strongly believe that as Africans, we didn't have the same necessity at that time that perhaps they did, in the sense that our problems were different. And that's why I think movies like Black Panther have played a really big role, that if we're allowed to evolve and grow exactly as we would have in our own times, perhaps would have gotten even further, because knowledge, and that's why thoughts, that's why that I disagree with Descartes in the sense that I think therefore I am, because Western civilization or Western society has made us believe that thoughts or education are the true measure of intelligence. But I can go and meet someone in the village who has never gone to school, and I'll sit and have a deep conversation about life, and I will learn a lot, even more than I'll have learned from books. And that's how stories were passed down from fireplace to fireplace. Technology came in, as I've said, from the industrial revolutions when they started. And then there was then a need to be able to document those stories. Now, the white man or the European found that actually that was much easier, or they were faster to document those stories. And that's how they're able to keep their cultures moving on and on. And because you learn, from that. Otherwise, if let's say something was to happen to this to this area where we are, and then all records about how we lived here or what we're doing did not exist, you'd never know exactly what happened. That's why Pompeii, the city that was covered by the volcano, is such a mystery, because there are very few. You only just have bits and pieces that show you how their culture was. But that's how important it is to tell stories. Chinua Achebe said that, where he said the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. That is an African proverb. And that's the same thing with the Chimamanda Adichie, who's one of my favorite authors, who mentioned or keeps emphasizing the importance of telling stories. The danger as well of having a single story and a single narrative. Because if you have a single narrative about a person, about a place, that's a narrative you'll tell your children and your children's children. And that's how prejudices begin. So in terms of how we are as human beings, how we are as Africans, I believe that our history is what impacted us. And I believe that storytelling is important to understand our identity. And that's why when you look at art as well, art is a very powerful medium of storytelling. But when you hear that we have our artifacts from Tanzania, which is seen as a cradle of civilization, or from Uganda or from Egypt, we have artifacts that are kept in museums in Berlin, museums in the UK, and they're saying that we're keeping them safe. Or we got them rightly. That is wrong. I believe those things belong to us, belong to Africans. And I believe if we're not intentional about protecting our heritage, about protecting our culture, and being intentional about seeing where you have Western culture or other culture that is that has permeated our cultures, we infuse with our culture. It's very good when you have a melting pot of culture. That's how you learn. But ultimately, it's not good when one culture tries to either remove another or to basically call it irrelevant. And that's, I think, what's happening in Africa at the moment.
yeah.
And that's why for most of us, from when we were children, as I've said, whenever we're thinking about doing anything, one of the things, twagala bulaya, abroad so that we can get the better life.
Yeah.
You think that if you're, in order for you to be smart, in order for you to be clever, to be intelligent, you have to go to these Ivy League schools.
Yeah.
And we have our own version of these Ivy League schools. And we also, as prejudiced, as perhaps you would, because we always say that whenever we're looking at people that have gone to Harvard or to Oxford, we say that, okay, for them they want to live in their own world, but we do the same thing for people that went to Budo, people that went to Nandiango, that went to SMARC, to Tari. We believe that because you didn't go to a traditional school, you don't have that knowledge that another one have. But in all honesty, and I hope the listeners don't get me wrong, there is truth in that, in the sense that if these schools allow thought, allow people perhaps to be, to think freely without limitation, knowledge is good. But the problem, I think, with the education system now is that knowledge has been used to put down or to make people dependent on other people rather than to think for themselves and want to do that. So I think all those stories, all those narratives about Africa are about Uganda, are what have caused us distrust, are what have caused us problems. But ultimately, as well, when we're given a seat on the international stage, most of us also blow that, in the sense that you'll have ministers go to speak at international events, and instead of listening to discussions and contributing, they're sleeping, or they're going for the per diem. And ultimately, when they come back here, that's all they're talking about. And you find that we shall always stay in that particular state because we're not speaking up. It's important to have a voice.
No, I think that's entirely true. And that is one of the biggest motivations for our podcast as well. When I was starting to get familiar with the internet in 2008, I think 2008, 2009, when I was leaving secondary school, most of the content, it was very hard to find African or say Ugandan content on the internet. And I remember Ann Kansime was, I think, the first Ugandan to get about 100,000 views, 100,000 subscribers on her YouTube channel. And it was a big celebration, like that is some sort of achievement, right? Well, it is actually, not to downplay it at all. But, the things that even when those companies proactively encouraged Africans and Ugandans to publish content online, to have some sort of visibility, to publish African stories online, there was just less content. That has been a big motivation for us. We decided, let's have a podcast where we get people to just come.
And I'm really happy.
Yeah.
Because honestly, this is the first time that I have sat down and spoken about, all these diverse topics, and we're able to sit and talk and discuss. I think it's that sense of diversity where you draw from various sources. I think they call it being eclectic, where you draw from all these sources. That's what I think. That's what should drive society. That's what helps us grow. That's what helps us to learn. And, I'm glad that we're having conversations like this, where you have a podcast like this, where you're able to call me, who I keep saying I'm a boy from Kashari. That's where I'm from. But ultimately, because I have taught myself, and I have learned, and I have decided to discover all these things, I'm able to then share and then tell other people that, look, I'm not alone. For the longest time, I thought that I was different. I thought that I was alone. In a sense, from school, you're always taught that you need to learn. Remember, in primary, you had English, math, science, SST. I was very good at SST. I was good at slightly good at science. I was good at science, but I sucked at math, and I was very good at English. But ultimately, because of that, since they get an average of all your grades, I was never the top performer in my school. And it's only now that I then discovered that all those are labels,
exactly.
And even then I realized that I learn differently. So I learn, even the way I learn, I read something which will then interest me to reading another thing, then another thing. And I realized that it's that helps me to discover. But ultimately, when I was in primary, I remember this story very well. When I went to a new school, I think it was Shimoni, and it was my first day of school. And I remember in the school before, I had learned, surprisingly, I was in, I think, P2, And then I thought that every time you go to another class. So in second term, I walked, with my bag and I went to P3. And I remember in P3, on my first day in P3, when I was supposed to be in P2, they were teaching about bees. And they taught that the young one of a bee is a grub. And that stuck because I was thirsty for knowledge. And then I changed schools and I went to this school. And when I went to this school, I remember on my first day, it was serendipity. But when they asked, I kid you not, what is the young one of a bee? Now, this is the new Kenneth. Has never been. My former school, I think, were about maybe 30. Here, we're about UPE, 150 to 200 in class. And small me puts up, I was very tiny at the time, puts up my hand. Young one of a bee is a grab. Deathly silent. And of course, the teacher was happy, good, but he moved on. And that particular teacher, none of the teachers ever took interest to find out, maybe does this child want to read? I see. But my other students as well thought I was showing off, that maybe I'd come to do that. And then I ended up becoming introverted because I was scared to share my views. Whenever you then challenge a teacher and ask a question, they beat you. They call your father or your mother, they say, this one is, aina kajanja, should not be doing this. And I think it's those things that keep us, asleep, keep us unconscious. It took me a while to awaken. And it took a lot of effort to be able to see that even now it's still difficult. And that's what I keep calling the social order, because you keep getting pulled back into it, where you have to live by certain rules. You have to dress a certain way. You have to act a certain way. Because ultimately we live by what we call a herd mentality. Herd mentality allows us to, or forces us to follow the crowd. Because if we stand out, we shall be ostracized. We shall be seen as different. And that's why, things like homosexuality are very difficult as well to grasp. Things like people that are venturing into aspects of gene editing and everything like that, because people fear what they don't understand. But I just understand now that love cannot exist where fear is. Love and fear are two separate ends of the spectrum. Fear drives
I've
most
never
of the
thought
things,
of it like that, but
love
I see.
exists beyond all those things. So ultimately, I believe that society or education, all those things are what have kept us in those traps. And conversations like this now, when you're able to realize, and for those listening, we're very many like this. There are very many who think, and just because we were talking about science, talking about all those things, doesn't mean that, you can't contribute to these discussions, because ultimately what you need to have is a free spirit. The ability to learn and be able to take other people's views without having to think, things that I'm taking, they will make me knock walls or whatever. No, you just take it as it is. And that's why I think I have a very big problem against the modern concept of the church, in a sense that for most of us, when we're growing up, there's a term in psychology called cognitive dissonance, which basically means that when you have two conflicting worldviews, you will tend or listen to the one that is most familiar. And that's what the church, the modern church religion, has done for most of us, in the sense that when we were young, we couldn't reconcile, for example, why women could not be able to be in the church
speak,
as priests.
take up leadership.
And yet now when I read, I find out that actually after Christ died, women were the drivers, were the people that started the church, were the ones who were convening and praying in secret because they were being persecuted. It's only when they realized that the church had such a powerful effect that it then became a tool of control. But outside that as well, if you go deeper, I didn't understand things like, for example, why you can't masturbate or why you can't do certain things. All those are seen as taboo. And are seen as things that every time you talk about it, they're like, no, things are too far. But when you actually sit and introspect and listen to them and think and try to understand, where did all these things come from? Were we always like this? What changed? What caused this to happen? When you start to question, you start to awaken. Because in questioning, your mind is open. And you're then able to see that some of those labels that they put don't exist. Ultimately, the reason why I can say I'm a Christian now is because I've understood that God, the concept of God, for me, God is not a he. God is not a person that I pray to, I kneel down and say, he did this or this. No, I believe God exists in us. God exists outside space and time, if I'm looking at physics. God exists out of what we can perceive with our eyes, because he doesn't operate under the same rules. He's not a human being. So he doesn't think, see, hear, feel. And I'm using he, and that is
because you just used to
want
it.
to use he.
Exactly.
So when you look at religions like the Hindus, Buddhism, and the rest, for them they believe in a consciousness, in a spirit, in the divine, in the sense that God is everything. God is the plant. God is the air. God is the sun. God is love. God is you. God is me. And it's that concept of God, honestly, that existed even in the Bible. Because if you look at Christ, the reason why Christ is such a contradiction, especially from the Old and New Testament, is because he decided to step outside the social order. He questioned things for what they, what they are. There are two stories I like about Christ, especially that one was the time when he walked on water. And if you remember that story, when Peter then got out of the boat, then Peter called out, Christ, is that you? He was doubting, but he still asked, and Christ approached him from his level. He said, yes, it is me. Come. And Peter followed, and he walked on water. And in going back, before he reached the boat, remember, he started to falter. Remember what Christ said? Ye of little faith. But Christ said of two people that they had the biggest faith that he'd ever seen. One was a lady who was at his feet, who he rebuked. And she said that even dogs eat scraps from their master. Remember what Christ said? I have never seen a person who has as faith as you. The second person was a Gentile, was the Roman official who came to Christ and said, please come and heal my daughter. Christ is like, should I go? Should we go to your home? Man was like, no, I am not holy enough to have a man like you come into my home. But I know that if you say it, my daughter will be healed. This was not a Christian. This was not someone, but he believed in God. He believed in Christ and in the miracles that he was performing because you could see, ultimately you can see someone's energy. And I believe Christ was a man like you and I, but who transcended all those things and became God. Because he decided, I'm not going to conform to these rules, to the social order, to the New Testament. So that's why he said, turn the other cheek. That was observing non-self, the ego. He decided to put the ego aside. So when they say turn the other cheek, it's not about boxing you or slapping you. It's about removing the ego, non-self. When it talks about working for heaven and working towards heaven, it's about impermanence. The realization that everything in this world fades away. But it doesn't mean that because you're working for heaven, you forget to live and love your neighbors, you love yourself. Are you seeing? But when I was listening to these stories, when I was listening to this scripture, when I was a child, I never understood it. I understood it in that particular concept of how it was framed, the box, the labels that they give it. But now in understanding these things and how society works, how religion works, how I work, I understood that actually the parables and all those things that are in the Bible is a beautiful book. And when you read it, there's so much wisdom. But I don't understand why people then look at the Bible alone and then don't talk about the Quran, don't talk about the Bhagavad Gita. Did you know the Bhagavad Gita is older than the Bible? It's older than the Quran. So, but people believe that that the world only exists in that particular concept, and that also explains really how powerful the mind is, how powerful it is to create a particular world, a particular construct. And that's what I believe also creates the other realm. We talked about other realms. Science believes in other dimensions, especially that other universes were also created as a result of the Big Bang, especially after the Higgs Boson experiment, the God particle. But I also believe that these other realms are also created as a result of the mind. Because you understand the reason why we exist, why we all have clothes and are seated here in this room is because of society. It's because of the rules of society. If we lived in another society where clothes were not important, do you think if you saw a person with clothes, wouldn't you think this person, well, Italy, But here we believe because we have clothes, that is the only way we're supposed to live, and that's the only way we are. But anyway, I'm saying that there are other ways. Ultimately, when you have discussions like these, your mind is open and you're able to question. It's important to question, not to lose yourself in questions, but to question to such an extent that you're able to realize that there is more than what you have been fed. And in that, there is, again, a famous philosopher called Francis Bacon, who said that a little philosophy inclines a man's mind towards atheism, but depth in philosophy inclines a man's mind towards religion. That is my story. That's why I'm able to say that I believe in God, I believe in Christ, because I understood that Christ is not a being that was so far divorced from myself that I cannot aspire to be him. No, he was a man like me. He was a man who saw that this world was not perfect, that there was more. Buddha was like that. Buddha was a man who was born of wealth, of riches, but he decided I'm going to go outside that. There's a book that I love by a gentleman called Hermann Hesse, a German. It's called Siddhartha. My God, that's a very powerful book. So it talks about a man who went on a journey for spiritual fulfillment, enlightenment. He was born into luxury. Everyone knew he was in India. They have different castes or classes. So he was in the first class. They were called Brahmins, I think. So these were the people who then became priests, who were then charged with, making sure they're the ones who guide the intellectual discussions of the time and make sure people are spiritual. But he then found that, he became bored. He thought there was a lot more than all that, and he kept questioning. And that's what led him to go on a spiritual journey. He went and became a shaman, where he let go of any material possessions, lived in the woods and the forest. But even then, he also realized the shamans were also always living, because they fasted all the time. They basically removed all the cravings, and they were striving to live a higher life. But he also realized that those people were also aspiring to another thing. Then he also was unhappy. He moved on. He also actually met the Buddha. And in meeting the Buddha taught him the three, so everything else. But he also questioned the Buddha. He was like, Buddha, you are powerful. You're a powerful man, and I can listen to the word. So imagine, for those that don't know the Buddha, imagine of Christ. Imagine you meeting Christ and telling him, okay, you're saying all these things, but ultimately it is difficult for a normal human being to attain that level like you, where all you believe is God. And you believe that God is there, because the world is tough. You cannot tell me that when I don't have rent, when I don't have food in my stomach, I will then turn the other cheek and I won't go and steal. And I won't go do something else. So Siddhartha told him that. And he went on that journey, and he discovered enlightenment. Finally, when he gave up all those things and stopped searching. When he discovered that enlightenment is in the now, is in the self. When you stop aspiring to the future, looking at the past, but when you start honing in and start to look at what is in the now, when you start to see that words, even all these things that we're saying, words are very dangerous things. Words don't. They're good in the sense that they allow us to communicate and allow us to say what we feel, but they don't truly capture the essence of our words. They don't capture the oomph or the power that exists beyond words. Because ultimately you find that we're saying the same things, but because we live with all these constructs, and because we label everything,
there's that concept of map and territory. So words are just a map, but the territory itself is broader.
Perfect. That is a very good way to put it.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, for accepting to be part of this. I think we are going to wrap it up from here. This has been so far my favorite. I will have to confess. I've enjoyed the conversation very much. Thank you very much for coming, and hopefully we'll get you on again in the future to talk more about something else at that time.
Yeah, I do. And again, I really apologize to listeners, because I realize we packed so many things into
this is the format of the podcast
an hour and
also.
a half. But I definitely, I hope there will be more times. Maybe then we can focus on a particular topic and go deeper into it. Because there's a lot to discuss. Honestly, I don't think these things can be discussed in one
I totally agree.
There's a lot more. But thank you. Keep having these conversations. I think
we shall.
For those of us that listen to podcasts and that like getting this knowledge, we've only been listening to podcasts from what's this guy of Freakonomics? Stephen Dubner, guys like Shankar Vedanta. Those are guys really that we listen to, but it's very beautiful and good when you see a fellow Ugandan, sitting down and doing this and hosting people that are able to share their lives and share this knowledge. Because again, I have realized that our curse as Ugandans, as Africans, has been that we're scared. We're afraid to say what we think. We're afraid to say what we feel. We're afraid to be who we are, but because of what we have been taught, because of how we have grown up. And it's important when you then remove the labels, when you then open the box so that we're able to speak and share. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you, Fox.